I moved to Willowbrook Heights 3 years ago, drawn by the tree-lined streets, the excellent schools, and the promise of a quiet suburban life. What the real estate agent failed to mention was that our neighborhood came with Karen Hofstetter, the HOA president, who treated her position like she was running a small authoritarian nation. I should have known something was off when I noticed that every single house on the block had their trash cans positioned at exactly the same angle on collection day. My first encounter with Karen happened during my second week in the neighborhood. I was planting roses in my front garden, still in my weekend clothes, dirt under my fingernails, genuinely enjoying the simple pleasure of working with soil and sunshine. That is when I heard the sound of expensive heels clicking rapidly on pavement. Karen appeared, clipboard in hand, her blonde highlights so aggressively maintained they practically glowed in the afternoon sun. "Hello there. I am Karen Hofstetter, HOA president. I need to inform you that the rose variety you are planting is not on the approved flora list. Section 7, subsection C of the HOA guidelines clearly states that all flowering plants must be selected from the pre-approved palette to maintain neighborhood aesthetic cohesion." I looked up at her, then down at my roses, then back up at her. These are just standard pink roses. They are probably the most common flower in suburban America. "That may be," she said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass, "but they are not on the approved list. I will need you to remove them and replace them with an acceptable variety. I can provide you with a list. There is a $15 administrative fee for the printed copy. Now, I should mention something about myself. I work remotely as the Chief of Staff for our state's Lieutenant Governor. It is the kind of position that does not come up much in casual conversation, but it means I understand systems, regulations, and most importantly, how to navigate bureaucracy. It also means I have connections that span from local municipal offices to state regulatory agencies. But in that moment, covered in dirt, and just wanting to plant some flowers, I decided to take the path of least resistance. I planted different roses from the approved list. After paying the $15 administrative fee. Make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World, because this story is just getting started, and trust me, you will want to see where this goes. Over the following months, I learned that Karen's reign of petty tyranny extended to virtually every aspect of neighborhood life. She measured the height of everyone's grass with an actual ruler. She maintained a database of every car that parked on the street overnight, complete with timestamps. She once called an emergency HOA meeting because someone's decorative garden gnome was, quote, facing the wrong direction and creating visual discord. I watched her reduce my elderly neighbor, Mr. Patterson, to tears because his mailbox had a small rust spot. She fined the Johnsons $300 because their daughter's birthday balloon escaped into their tree and stayed there for 2 days, calling it unauthorized decorative elements. She sent certified letters threatening legal action against a family whose 6-year-old drew a hopscotch court on their own driveway with washable chalk. But I kept my head down. I followed every rule, checked every box, maintained my property to her exact specifications. I had learned long ago that sometimes the best strategy is to be invisible while you assess the situation. And I was assessing everything. Then came the Memorial Day Parade incident. Our town's Memorial Day Parade is a beloved tradition. Every year, the route goes straight through the main street that borders our neighborhood. People line the streets with lawn chairs, kids wave flags, veterans march with pride. It is genuinely one of the nice things about living in a small suburban community. The town requires that the street be kept clear of obstacles, and residents are asked to keep their vehicles off the parade route for the morning. I woke up early on Memorial Day, made coffee, and positioned my chair on my lawn with a clear view of the parade route. The morning was perfect, sunny but not too hot, with a light breeze carrying the scent of honeysuckle. Families were gathering, kids were excited, and there was that pleasant buzz of community anticipation. That is when I noticed Karen's car. Her silver Lexus SUV was parked directly on the parade route, right in front of her house. Not slightly encroaching, fully blocking half the street. At first, I thought maybe she had forgotten and would move it. The parade was due to start in 45 minutes. 30 minutes before the parade, I saw a police officer approach her door. I was close enough to hear the conversation. "Ma'am, I need you to move your vehicle. The parade route needs to be clear." Karen appeared in her doorway, wearing a white pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Officer, I am aware of the parade. However, I have an important HOA board meeting via video conference this morning, and I may need to leave at any moment. As HOA president, my responsibilities take precedence. The parade can simply go around my vehicle." The officer, a patient-looking man in his 50s, tried again. "Ma'am, there is no room to go around. You are blocking half the street. The fire trucks and the marching band cannot get through." "Then I suggest they reschedule," Karen said, and actually closed the door in his face. I watched the officer radio for backup. I watched as another officer arrived. I watched as they knocked again, and Karen refused to answer. I watched as the parade organizers arrived, stressed and confused about the delay. Families with kids were asking what was wrong. Veterans in their uniforms were waiting in formation, confused about why they were not moving. Then I watched as Karen emerged from her house, apparently finished with her meeting, and attempted to get into her car. The police officers immediately approached her. "Ma'am, you need to move this vehicle now, or we will have to cite you for obstruction." Karen actually laughed. "Cite me? Do you know who I am? I am the HOA president. I maintain property values in this neighborhood. I keep order. You should be thanking me, not threatening me. Ma'am, this is a public street. The town has jurisdiction, not your HOA. Move the vehicle now." What happened next was spectacular in the worst possible way. Karen, realizing she was not going to win this argument, decided to double down in the most Karen way possible. She got into her car, started it, and instead of moving it off the parade route, she turned on her hazard lights and simply sat there, doors locked, windows up. The police knocked on her window. She ignored them. They knocked harder. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling. They informed her through the window that she was now actively obstructing a municipal event. She held up one finger in a "wait one moment" gesture and continued scrolling. That is when the chief of police arrived. Chief Morrison was a no-nonsense woman who had served in the Marines before joining the force. I knew her professionally because she coordinated with the Lieutenant Governor's office on various public safety initiatives. She took one look at the situation, made a decision, and acted. 3 sharp knocks on Karen's window. Karen looked up, annoyed. Chief Morrison held up her badge and made a very clear gesture to roll down the window. Karen, perhaps recognizing that this was a different level of authority, cracked the window about 2 inches. "Ma'am, you have 30 seconds to move this vehicle, or you will be placed under arrest for obstruction of a public event, disorderly conduct, and failure to comply with lawful orders. Your 30 seconds starts now." Karen's face went through an impressive range of emotions. Shock, indignation, disbelief, and then settling on smug defiance. "You cannot arrest me. I am an HOA president. I know my rights. This is harassment." 20 seconds. "I want to speak to the mayor. I want to speak to your supervisor. I donate to the Policeman's Benevolent Fund every year." 10 seconds. Karen stayed in her car. I genuinely think she believed they would back down. That her title, her status, her sheer confidence would make them blink first. They did not blink. What happened next will forever be etched in my memory. Chief Morrison signaled to her officers. One moved to the driver's side door, another to the passenger side. A third held a bat and ready to break the window if needed. The chief repeated one final time that Karen needed to exit the vehicle immediately or she would be forcibly removed. Karen rolled up her window in response. The sound of breaking glass was shockingly loud. Then the driver's door was open, and Karen was being pulled from her vehicle, screaming about lawsuits and rights and how dare they treat her this way. She actively resisted, pulling away from the officers, at one point trying to grab onto her steering wheel to stay in the car. By now, at least 200 people were watching. Kids with their little flags. Veterans in their dress uniforms. Parents with cameras out because they had been planning to film the parade and were now accidentally documenting something entirely different. Karen was handcuffed. She screamed louder. "This is assault. Police brutality. I am being persecuted. Someone call 911. One of the younger officers, trying not to laugh, said, "Ma'am, we are 911. She was placed in the back of a police cruiser, still screaming, as a tow truck arrived to move her Lexus. The parade began 15 minutes late. When the veterans marched past, many of them looked at the police cruiser with Karen inside and actually saluted the officers. The crowd cheered. I should have been satisfied with that. Karen arrested, publicly humiliated, her car towed, facing multiple charges. But that was not the end of the story. Not even close. Because 2 days later Karen was back. Charges reduced to a fine, car retrieved from impound, and apparently more determined than ever to reassert her authority. I found a notice on my door that evening. The HOA was implementing new, enhanced community standards, in response to what she called recent challenges to neighborhood leadership. The notice included new fines for infractions, mandatory inspections of all properties, and a requirement that all homeowners submit to monthly compliance reviews. The monthly HOA fees were also increasing by 40% to cover what she termed administrative expansion necessitated by external interference with HOA governance. She was taking her embarrassment out on the entire neighborhood. And she was targeting me specifically. The notice mentioned that my property would be the first subject to the new enhanced inspection protocol, scheduled for the following week. I sat in my home office that evening, looking at the notice, and made a decision. I had tried being reasonable. I had tried following the rules. I had tried staying invisible. Karen had declared war on the neighborhood because she could not handle being held accountable for her own actions. It was time to change strategies. I opened my laptop and started making calls. The first was to the county clerk's office. The second was to the state records department. The third was to a friend who worked in municipal planning. By midnight, I had a complete picture of Willowbrook Heights HOA's legal structure, and more importantly, its vulnerabilities. Here is something most people do not know about HOAs. They are legal entities, which means they have to follow very specific regulations. They have to maintain proper documentation, hold elections according to their bylaws, and manage their finances transparently. More importantly, in our state, HOA board members can be removed by a vote of the membership under specific circumstances, including malfeasance, violation of fiduciary duty, or violation of the HOA's own governing documents. I spent the next week gathering documentation. Every fine Karen had issued. Every rule she had enforced. Every fee she had collected. And then I cross-referenced everything against the actual HOA bylaws and state regulations. What I found was breathtaking. Karen had been violating the HOA's own rules for years. She had issued fines that were not actually in the bylaws. She had created rules without proper board votes. She had increased fees without the required membership approval. She had spent HOA funds on personal expenses and called them administrative costs. The list went on and on. But I did not stop there. I pulled property records. I pulled tax filings. I pulled every public document related to the HOA's finances. And that is when I found it. The thing that would change everything. The common areas of our neighborhood, the small park where kids played, the walking paths, the decorative entrance gate, all of it was owned by the HOA. But buried in old documents from when the neighborhood was first developed, there was a clause. If the HOA ever dissolved, the common areas would be sold at public auction, and the proceeds would be distributed to the homeowners. I made another call, this one to a former colleague who now worked in private equity real estate. Then I called my attorney. Then I called a few more friends, the kind of connections you make when you work in the lieutenant governor's office and have spent years building relationships across state government. 3 weeks later, I called for an emergency HOA meeting. According to the bylaws, any homeowner could call for such a meeting with a petition signed by 20% of the residents. I had signatures from 60%. People were tired of Karen. They were ready for change. The meeting was held in the neighborhood clubhouse. Every seat was filled, with people standing in the back. Karen sat at the head table, looking confident, probably thinking this was just another group of neighbors she could intimidate into submission. I stood up with a folder that had grown to about 3 inches thick. I would like to present a motion to remove Karen Hofstetter as HOA president, and to dissolve the entire HOA board for violations of our bylaws, fiduciary duty, and state HOA regulations. The room went silent. Karen actually laughed. You cannot do that. I am the president. I have been president for 8 years. This neighborhood would fall apart without my leadership. Let me be specific, I said, opening the folder. Over the past 5 years, you have issued 147 fines that are not supported by our actual bylaws. You have created 23 rules without proper board votes. You have raised fees 4 times without the required membership approval. And you have spent approximately $38,000 in HOA funds on expenses that you classified as administrative but were actually personal. I laid out the documentation. Every violation, every receipt, every email. Karen's face went from smug to pale. I continued. Under state law and our own bylaws, these violations constitute grounds for immediate removal and potential legal action for breach of fiduciary duty. I am calling for a vote. The vote was not even close. 92% in favor of removal. Karen was out. The board was dissolved. And then I introduced the second motion. I move that we dissolve the Willowbrook Heights HOA entirely. Our neighborhood does not need this level of oversight. Basic municipal codes cover everything we actually need. All we are doing is paying fees to enforce arbitrary rules that make our lives worse. That vote took longer. People had questions. What about the common areas? What about property values? What about maintaining standards? I explained the property auction clause. I explained that without HOA fees, everyone would save thousands of dollars per year. I explained that municipal codes already covered everything important like property maintenance and noise ordinances. I explained that property values were determined by location, schools, and the actual houses, not by whether someone's mailbox was the exact approved shade of beige. The vote passed. 78% in favor. 1 week later, the Willowbrook Heights HOA was officially dissolved. The common areas were put up for public auction as required by the original development agreement. And that is when I implemented Phase 2 of my plan. The auction was held online, open to any bidder. The properties were divided into 3 lots. The entrance area with the decorative gate, the small park, and the walking paths. The minimum bid for each lot was set by an independent appraiser at fair market value. I bid on all 3 lots. So did several other parties, mostly small real estate investment companies. The bidding was competitive. And then, in the final minutes of the auction, a new bidder appeared. A company called Hofstetter Properties LLC. It was Karen. She was trying to buy the common areas herself. I watched the bidding through my laptop, fascinated. She clearly thought that if she owned the common areas, she could control access, charge the neighbors fees, essentially recreate her little kingdom through property ownership instead of HOA authority. She bid aggressively. The price climbed well above the appraised value. She was spending real money, probably draining her savings, absolutely determined to maintain her power over the neighborhood. In the final 30 seconds, I made my move. Not a small incremental bid, but a massive one. An amount that was frankly absurd for what these properties were actually worth, but that I could afford thanks to years of careful savings, smart investments, and yes, a fairly substantial salary. I won all 3 lots. Karen's final bid was exceeded by a margin that made it clear she could not compete. But I was not done. Not even close. 2 days after the auction closed, I filed paperwork with the county. I was donating the entrance area to the town as a public park. I was granting the walking paths as a public easement, maintained by municipal services. And the actual park area, I was establishing it as a community space under a nonprofit trust that I set up, managed by a board of neighborhood volunteers, free to use, no fees, no memberships, just a genuinely public space for the community. The entire neighborhood would now have access to everything they had before, except without paying HOA fees, without following arbitrary rules, and without Karen having any say whatsoever in how things were managed. I made sure the paperwork was filed, processed, and finalized before I sent the email to the neighborhood distribution list explaining what I had done. I outlined the new arrangements, explained that there would be no fees or restrictions, and invited anyone interested to join the volunteer board managing the community space. The response was overwhelming. People were grateful, relieved, excited. I received dozens of emails thanking me. Someone organized a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate. It felt good. It felt like I had actually made people's lives better. And then I did one more thing. One final piece that I had been saving. I called Karen and asked her to meet me at the entrance to the neighborhood, where the old decorative gate stood. She agreed, probably thinking she could confront me, maybe threaten legal action, assert some kind of dominance even in defeat. When she arrived, I was standing next to a work crew. They were removing the old gate, the one that said, Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, in pretentious script letters. Karen looked confused. What are you doing? That gate is property of the, oh. She realized mid-sentence that it was not HOA property anymore. It was my property, which I had donated to the town. Which meant I could do whatever I wanted with it. I am replacing it, I explained calmly. The old gate represented a system that made people's lives worse. So we are putting up something better. The new sign was already waiting to be installed. Simple, elegant, welcoming. It said, Willowbrook Heights a public community, with the town seal underneath. But that was not the final touch. The final touch was the small plaque being installed below the main sign. A plaque that would be there permanently, seen by everyone who entered or left the neighborhood. It read, Common areas donated for public use by the residents of Willowbrook Heights, following the dissolution of the HOA in 2025. Karen stared at it. I could see her mind working, understanding dawning. She had spent years building her little empire. She had devoted herself to control, to rules, to maintaining her authority. She had even spent her savings trying to buy back that control after losing her position. And now it was gone. All of it. Not just gone, but transformed into something that existed specifically to prevent anyone from ever having that kind of petty power over their neighbors again. Every time she drove into the neighborhood, she would see that sign. Every time she walked past the park, she would remember that she no longer had any say in who used it or how. Every time she saw neighbors enjoying the paths, she would know that there was no rule she could create, no fine she could issue, no authority she could claim. You spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. Just to spite me? I smiled at her, the kind of calm smile you give someone when you know you have already won. No, Karen. I spent that money to free an entire neighborhood from someone who confused authority with leadership, rules with community, and control with respect. You made people's lives worse because you could. I made people's lives better because I could. We both had power. We just chose to use it differently. But you cannot, this is not. She was struggling for words, her usual confidence completely shattered. The work crew finished installing the sign. It looked perfect. Welcoming. Permanent. You know what the best part is? I continued. Every single thing I did was completely legal. I followed every rule, every regulation, every procedure. I did not break a single law. I just used the system the way it is meant to be used, by someone who actually understands it. You spent years enforcing rules you made up. I spent 3 months enforcing rules that actually exist. That is the difference between us. Karen stood there, staring at the new sign, finally understanding the full scope of what had happened. She had not just lost her position. She had not just been embarrassed. She had been systematically outmaneuvered by someone who had better resources, better connections, and a better understanding of how systems actually work. Someone who had taken her petty kingdom and transformed it into something she could never control again. Her mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. Her face went through shock, horror, disbelief, and finally settling on a kind of broken understanding. She had been beaten completely, permanently, and there was absolutely nothing she could do about it. I picked up my folder, gave her one final nod, and walked back to my house, leaving her standing there staring at the sign that marked the end of her reign. If you enjoyed watching Karen's downfall, smash that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World for more stories of entitled people getting exactly what they deserve. Drop a comment and let me know what you would have done in my situation.